Hello. So today we're going to talk about Blender and the basics, of course. When you enter to Blender, there for the first time, there is a screen or a pop-up similar like this one, well, which it lets you specify some settings. For example, which actions will do a space and some other specifics. For example, you could use previous settings that you already had in previous versions of Blender. If you already set it up, that's fine. If you have the chance to change it, I normally recommend to use a space for the search bar, as just playing something or playing an animation, you can always use the play button, and keyboards normally have those. So yeah, for now we are going to start a new project, just a general one. In the general one, we are going to be welcome with this interface there. This is the basic interface for Blender. So right now we are in the modeling tab. We have different tabs where we have like a pre-made template for the different interfaces. That doesn't mean you cannot change these. You can always come here on the top left corner of each interface and just change what the interface is supposed to be. For example, right now we are in the 3D viewport, as you can see. We could always change it, for example, to the UV editor, to dope sheet, to I don't know, shader editor, and we can always change it back. As you can see, they have keybind, so that means I can use, for example, Shift F1 or Shift F5 to go back to the 3D viewport in this case. So 3D viewport is where we have our objects and data objects represented in 3D form. So we have our camera, we have a cube over here, and if we were to add more cubes, or if we were to add a sphere, or if we were to add a Suzanne, whatever you will add, you will reveal it here, represented as a 3D representation for saying something. So let's delete that. Here on the top corner, we have the our outliner. The outliner is similar to the 3D viewport, but this one is just in a list form. So all the objects that we have here will be represented here in the outliner. As you can see, if I were to add Suzanne again, you will see that Suzanne will be represented here, and this will help us in extensive scenes where we have a lot of objects. We can use come over here, and for example, if we already have a name for our objects, we can use specify, oh, I'm searching for one specific object, for example, base over here. I can find it, or we can just click it and it will be highlighted in a 3D viewport. For example, if I were to click Suzanne will be highlighted in 3D viewport. Now let's get rid of that. Also, we have collections. Collections are kind of like files. This is not like Photoshop. So these are not layers, they're objects and files. So that way we can organize our scene. For example, we have camera over here, but we already have camera over here. So we have our models, and we have our camera and lighting stuff. So for example, if we were to add some lighting, we can just come here, light, and add whatever light we want to add. For example, like this. So yeah, right now let's leave it like that for the moment. And then here we have the property panel in the bottom right. The property panel is where you're going to find all the different settings for this project, not for Blender, but for this project in a specific. For example, as you can see, if I were to select the cube, you will see that some of the tabs over here will change. The same thing if I were to select the camera. As you can see, now we have access to a new tab over here that is the camera options. So all of these will give me access to set up specific settings for my camera. For example, I can change the focal length, I can change the depth of field, and those specific things. Same thing for here. Like for the cube, I will have access to modifiers, to particle systems, for simulations, and go on and on and on. So this is the basic interface, and in terms of 3D modeling, you will be here doing using all these three. Like outliner maybe is kind of confusing sometimes for the new people to Blender, so it seems a little bit extra, but it is a really good tool to organize your scene, and keeping a scene organized is a really key in big scenes or complex models that are separated in different pieces. There is different ways. Now let's talk about how you move or navigate through like the 3D viewport. In this case, you have keypoints that you can get access to. For example, we can arbitrate, we can pan around, or we can zoom in, right? But we also have these gizmo over here that also allow us, if I were to use, when this is gray out, I can just click and hold, and it will allow me to arbitrate. We will have these, the magnifying glass to zoom in, zoom out. We have this hand to pan around. This one is just to get into camera view. And this one is just to lock the camera within the view. So for example, if I were to move, it will move the camera in our view. And if you're outside the camera, it will change to this, that is the swap in between perspective and orthographic. So as you can see, it says user's perspective, and if I click it, you will see that it is user's orthographic. Now let me screencast. I don't know if screencast is working with the latest version of Blender. This is 5.0, but seems like it's not doing anything. Well, okay, so the keypoints for this, the last set for this gizmo, I don't really use this gizmo because I think it's distracting. In terms of like orientation, I guess it could be fine, but you already have the orientations specified in Blender itself. So as you can see, we have a green line and we have a red line. This red line represents the x-axis and the green line represents the y-axis. So you already have the orientation. And even if you wanted the z-axis, you can just add it over here. But we know that the z axis in Blender is just up and down. So we already have these two axes. So we already know where is the remaining axis. So first, if we arbitrate around, we just need to hold the middle wheel button, and we will be able to arbitrate around. It will arbitrate in the center of the screen. So even if I pan around, it will arbitrate into the center of the screen. So you need to be careful with that, because sometimes it can be a little overwhelming, the movement, because it's a new thing. You're not used to it, so you can just get lost and you're just trying to reach your objects again. So now the second one is, if we're going to pan around, you just need to hold the middle wheel of the button, the bottom of the middle wheel, and just hold shift with it. So shift, middle wheel button, and you will be able to pan around. This will be a planar movement depending on your view. So it will be up and down or left to right, that's it. And finally, if we want to zoom, you can just scroll in, scroll out, or you can just hold Control, hold the middle wheel, and just push in or push out. So move up and down to zoom in and zoom out. That's the basic things of moving, zooming, and all those kind of things. There is nothing too complicated about that. Now, let's talk about the models. The models have different aspects. So what I mean by that, we have different kind of models. As I say earlier, we have data objects, and we have then model or mesh objects, better said. So data objects, they are like camera that they are used here to represent, for example, our final render. Or for example, we have objects like empty. If I move it aside, it is similar to a cube, but this one doesn't have a mesh. So if I were to change my mode, you will see that we don't have access to edit mode. Edit mode, I will explain briefly soon. So this empty is an object data where we normally use it to save information. For example, if we were to go to the side panel, if I press N, I can go to the side panel. And as you can see, we have item, and in item we have the different aspects or the different data that we have on this model. For example, location, rotation, and scale. So we can save all this data. For example, if we were to rotate it, you will see that the rotation will be a change. And for example, if I were to parent this object, for example, this, now this, whenever I rotate my empty, it will affect this. And now if I were to reset the rotation, it will reset the rotation of my empty, but also will change the rotation of my original cube. So it's mostly to save information, for example, location or rotation. A scale can be used, but it is in specific cases. Now, mesh objects, they are conformed for a mesh that will allow us to modify how it looks, and it will allow us to do the 3D modeling itself. So mesh objects are conformed by three main aspects that are vertices, edges, and faces. If I were to go to change to object from object mode to edit mode, you will see that we will have a different kind of things. For example, these dots in the corner, and we will have these three new objects over here, or these three new interactable pieces of the interface. So here, if we have the first one in blue, we are able to select edges. As you can see, I'm selecting the vertices. If you see, I'm selecting the vertices individually. I can also hold the shift button and use click on top of the next one, and it will add it to the selection. So shift is to add to the selection. If we do the second one, we are going to be able to select edges. As you can see, the whole edge will be highlighted, and the last one will be for the whole faces. So faces are compound or made of edges. They can be made of multiple edges. So they can be from 3 or more edges. So 3 edges will make a triangle. For example, if I were to do this, I have a face made out of 3 edges. Now, same thing for vertices, they will have 3 vertices. So a triangle will have 3 edges, 3 vertices, and it will be just one face. But also we have quads. Quads are 4 edges, 4 vertices, and there are just one face. But also there are subdivide. Boom. There are n-gons that are more than 4 edges. So it could be from 5 to, let's say, infinite for say something. So you need to be careful in terms of when you are using or when you are getting some of them, because for example, triangle in some specific cases and scenarios can be detrimental to your goal. Quads are normally the goal in aspects, and endguns are really bad for shading in specific cases and scenarios. They can be useful, but there is a advanced aspect of 3D modeling. Now, as I told you, when we do 3D modeling, we're going to be modifying the mesh of our object, or you are just going to modify the scale of our object, because we can modify the scale of our object in, for example, in object mode. How we do those kind of things? Well, we can use our keybinds to do 3D modeling. The most basic will be G to grab. So that's the most intuitive way to see it. We can call it move, but if we in Blender is called, the action is called grab. For some reason, it's just, I don't know why they call it like that, but it's G for grab, just to make it intuitive. It will allow us to change the location. Here we can apply axes. For example, if I were to, while the operation is active, I can press X, and it will allow me to constrain all that operation to the x-axis. So it doesn't matter where I have the cursor, it will just move it along of the x-axis. Same if I were to, while middle operation, I can press Y and it will change it. I will change the constraint to the y-axis. Same thing for the z-axis. We can select multiple axes. So for example, let's say I wanted to move it along of the X and Y axis. So while the operation is still active, I can press Shift Z, and that will allow me to specify Blender that I want to move this object along of all the axes but the Z axis. So I'm restraining the Z axis for the from the operation. That same thing can be applied to other operations. For example, a scale. If I were to press S to scale, I can use a scale along of the X axis, the Z axis, the Y axis, or multiple axes at the same time. So Shift Z, it will do all but the Z axis, Shift X, all but the X axis, and Shift Y, all but the Y axis. Now, we have rotation. Axis can be applied to rotation, X, Y, Z, Shift Z, Shift X, Shift Y, but as you can see, Shift Y is just the same thing as doing Y rotation. Shift Z is just the same thing as doing Z rotation, and Shift X is just the same thing as doing X rotation. So sometimes it can be useful to do multiple axes at the same time. Sometimes it's just not. Now, how we can change between object and edit mode without needing to just come to this drop down menu. We can just press tab, and in this case I have an add-on enabled, but for vanilla Blender it just will change between edit and object mode. But the real operation of this specific keybind is it will change between your two last interfaces that you or the last two change the last two modes that you used before. For example, let's say you were in sculpt mode and then you change to weight paint. If you press tab, you will be changing in between these two. You can always use Control Tab, and it will, as you can see, if you hold them, Control Tab, you will see all the modes. So this is a vanilla or a default Blender version of the pie menu. So you have object, you have edit, you have sculpt, and you can just always change in between those. So you aim to whatever you want and you just click it or release the keys. So in edit mode, we can still apply all our operations. For example, let's say I want to change the mode of this. I can press 1 in Vanilla Blender, of course. I can press 1 to select vertices. As you can see, it changed. Number 2 in the normal keyboard, not in the not in the numpad, but in the normal keyboard numbers. If you press 2, you will be able to change to edges, and if you press 3, you will change to faces. Now, the operations that we said before do still applied for here. So that's how we do the modeling. So we can scale, we can rotate, we can move. So G to grab, R to rotate, S to scale. Now we did something to our model, and maybe we want to undo that. The way is like the big majority of the programs use Control Z to undo an operation. If for some reason we did too much undo, we could always use the opposite operation, that is redo. So Control Shift Z will redo the operation. Okay. So let's talk a little bit about 3D modeling specific tools. For example, we will have access to tools like Inset. This is an intuitive tool. If you use Inset or press I for Inset, you will be creating a inside face of wherever geometry you have selected. For example, let's say I will cancel just by pressing right click or escape. In this case, I can just press shift click and I can select multiple parts of the geometry. If I were to select I, you will see that it will create an inside face of all the selected parts of the 3D model. Yeah, that's correct. Now we can keep adding more details to this. For example, we have other tool like it is the loop tool. So we can add cuts to our model. For this, we can press Ctrl R and it will create a loop around the model. So Ctrl R, we aim to a specific location. Normally, I will recommend this specific thing. When you do Ctrl R, you will aim to one edge. So look at an edge and aim to the middle area of that edge. For example, here, as you can see, it is following the perpendicular way of this vertex, or this edge, sorry. If I were to change over here, it will change the perpendicular way to that edge. Now, you need to, this is a good way to understand your topology. If I were to have, for example, a triangle over here, if I were to do Ctrl R over here, as you can see, when it meets the triangle, it just cuts the flow. In this case, let's call this flow, but this is just a loop. So the terminology is loop, but I just say flow because it is a little bit more intuitive. So it's just like you turn on the water and then just turn it off. That's it. So flows are important in some specific cases and scenarios, but in the big majority, you are good as long as you have a good detail. Now, I'm going to... Okay, let's continue with something else. If we are going to use, for example, select this, we can use a tool like extrusion. So E to extrude, as the name says, it just take one part of the geometry and extrude it outwards of the geometry. Or we can use inset, and for example, we can use extrude inwards, the same thing. We don't really need to use inset to do the extrusion inwards. You can just extrude it in. just is a process of, for example, adding details. Those are the basic things that you will be doing while modifying. So you will be moving things, you will be extruding things, you will be insetting things, and then, for example, you can do more inset. Then we can select this area over here and then just extrude it over here. We have a detail over there like that. Now, in this chart of models that you sent me, you have like different aspects that are fine. For example, all the things that I mentioned to now. But one of the things that it is really important for new people or for new people to Blender is learn how to select objects. For example, number one is just selecting one piece. If I will choose to click in another part of the model, it will select that specific part. If I were to just hold the shift click, it will add to the selection. But now there are other operations that will allow me to select. For example, if I were to hold Alt and then aim to the center of an edge, I will be able to select a complete loop of object or the part of the geometry, a loop of the geometry. So if I were to hold Alt and click over here, it will select the whole loop all around. If I were to do it over here, it will do the same thing. If I want to add more loops to this selection, I always can just add the shift button to this operation. For example, I can just do Alt, Shift, aim to the specific loop I want to add. For example, let's say this one and let's say this one, and we can just continue adding and adding to our operation. Second one, we have the circular tool. If I press C for circular tool, you will see that we have a circle surrounding our mouse or cursor. If we roll up, it will decrease the size of the circle, or if we scroll down, it will increase the size. So when you click, whatever is inside of that circle will be selected. If you hold the middle button of the mouse, whatever is inside of the circle will be deselected. So, for example, we can do that, but it will only select what is in front and not what is in the back part. Now we have other operation, like if I were to press D to get to this left side panel, you can also tap D to the left side panel. We will have here, as you can see, we have the select box, a box selection. If I were to just click and drag, you will see that it creates a box, just like it works in Windows when you can select multiple objects or multiple files. It's the same thing over here. You can select multiple objects or multiple parts of the geometry, in this case multiple parts of the mesh. So those are the basic ways when you can where you can select your objects. So that's really helpful way to do things or aspects around in Blender. Now, let's talk about some specific aspects. As you said over here in the model breakdown, we have symmetry. So we will have mirror objects, and we will have subdivisions. So mirror and subdivisions are modifiers. Modifiers are only applied to mesh objects. For example, in this case, we have this cube, this deformed cube, and we can add cuts to it. So let's use do one detail over here. If we were used to go to property panels and just go to the modifier tabs, is this range. So add modifier, and then we will have these. We will need to understand what's the purpose behind the modifiers instead of like searching it and trying to guess what it is. We can just search over here or understand the purpose of our model. For example, if we were to use a subdivision modifier, we're subdividing the object. So that means we are generating more geometry. So that means if we go to generate, we will find our modifier. As you can see, we're in generate and you have subdivision modifier. We can just click it, and as you can see, it will start subdividing our object. We can increase the level. This level over here is for the viewport. So this is what's matter right now. If we apply the modifier, it will apply this level. This level over here is for the render. For example, let's say I can do 4, and then I press F12 to do a render. You will see it will look smoother than it had in the viewport. So as you can see over here, it's a little pink because it's missing texture, but well, because the world is missing texture, but as you can see over here, it looks smoother rather than here that it looks like a little jagged. So when you render, it just shows this level. But if you were going to apply the modifier, it will just apply this level, the viewport level. We have different versions of the subdivision. We have the simple version. Simple version will not smooth it, will just create more and more geometry. If I were to disable this and we were able to just show the wireframe over here, you will see that we will have a lot of geometry over these areas. Now, if we were to change it to cut mold, you will see that it will just smooth it. Change this, and we are fine. Now, this is for the subdivision modifier. Let's talk about the mirror modifier. That the mirror modifier is still generate because we are generating geometry. So as you can see, we have the mirror modifier and we have this aspect. So in mirror modifier, we will have the axis where we want to affect. Also, we have a specific parts of, for example, a mirror object or clipping. Clipping, it is really good to use. What it does is when one part of the geometry just reach the mirror, it's just won't pass through that specific part of the, or that division of the mirror. As you can see, it cannot go farther than that. Merge will do that. All these parts over here will just merge, or all these vertices over here will just merge when we are done with this. Now, as you can see, if I were just to move this, it's just creating a copy of our object and it is mirroring. Right now, it's not really what we want, because if I were to just apply this modifier and then I were just to press go to edit mode, press L to select the link geometry, you will see that we just have a copy of an object, a copy of our object, and that's it. Well, we have different options here in our modifier. For example, let's change this to this. I want this specific part, I guess. Now let's change it to this. You can also add multiple axes. You are not constrained to just one. Let's just leave it there. Now, we have this option bisect. Bisect, what it does, it just cuts the model in half for the specific axis you're using, or just cut the model in half. Just take into account that the mirror modifier takes into account the half of the object or the origin point as the middle of the object. So that means the half of this, it will be dependent on that origin point. So as you can see, it aligns. If we were to change the positioning of that origin point, it will change. So for example, let's say set origin and set RE3 cursor. So it changed the positioning of the origin So it changed how the modifier is applied to the object. Now, but if we were to hit bisect, you will see that it's modifying in a different way. So now you see that we are kind of mirroring from this side to this side, right? And I want this detail I made over here. So one of the things that we can do is we can use flip. Flip, what it does is just change which side is mirroring to which side. So in this case, now we're mirroring from left to right instead of right to left. Mirror object is just similar to the origin point. It's just override it with a specific object. For example, let's say I want to add an empty over here. I can just select that empty, and that empty will be my new origin for this specific mirror modifier. So if I were to change the positioning of my modifier, it will change how the mirror modifier is applied. Now I can change not only the location, but I can also change the rotation. I can also change the scale, but as you can see, it won't do anything. Let's get rid of that. And we have other specific data over here. For example, mirror UVs, offset UVs. This is more specific for UV part of 3D modeling, but we don't really need them right now. So yeah, so let's create a new object. For creating a new object, you can just hold Shift A. Shift A will add something specific, or you can come over here to the top left part of the 3D viewport, and you will go to add, and as you can see, it says a shortcut Shift A. You can click over here and you can add whatever you need. It looks different than the normal Blender because I have some specific parts from some add-ons. Some of them are free, some of them are not. But let's just keep it straight on just the basics of Blender. So, for example, let's say we're going to add a cube. We can add a modifier, for example, a subdivision modifier. Normally you will come over here and you will go generate add subdivision modifier, but there is also a keybind for subdivisions. You can hold Control and then press a number from 1 to normally 6, but you can do more to add subdivisions. As you can see, if I were to do Control 1, it will change the level on the viewport to 1, Control 2 will change it to 2, Control 4 will change it to 4. Let's say I want 2 levels of subdivision. I can just go now into edit mode, and for example, I can just select this face, I can just insert it, I can just insert that face again, select my model over here, for example, and then I can just add a cut over here, and it will allow me to control my my subdivision modifier. Now we can, for example, select this over here. We can insert it. We can just go in, and as you can see, we kind of have something similar to the AirPods model. So for example, we could just select this by holding Alt click. We can just scale it, and for example, we can just do the same thing over here. If we want to look in a specific area that for mesh that it is kind of trapped behind the modifier, we can use disable this over here, and it will show the mesh without the modifier being applied. So the modifier is still there. If we go to object mode, it will show the modifier, but it will be disabled inside of the edit mode. Now, if we select the part that we want and then enable this again, we can use modifier model. So for example, scale like that. I will leave it like that. And then I can just do here, can select that face and then press Ctrl plus in the numpad. So that will allow me to select more parts of my geometry. So that option, if you go to select, you will go to more, less, you will see you have Ctrl plus and the numpad, Ctrl minus and the numpad to select more or select less. What it does is just gets one part of this geometry and it will just select what is surrounding that specific part of the geometry. And that's it. So now I will just scale to Control Shift Z, Shift Y, scale, Shift X. So I want to just make it thicker. I don't want it to make it longer. So that's why I'm just scaling it on all the axes but the X axis. And right now we have kind of a similar shape to the earbuds cap. So I'm just going to add one additional cut over here that will allow me to make it a little curvature a little better over here. For example, I can scale it more or I can scale it to make it tinier. So it will depend on what you need. So this is one of the specific things. You can always do Control S to save your model. That's I always recommend that you always save your model. And let's continue with the earbud model. Okay. So if we were to do a second part of this, we could also use a cube, as we want something similar to the shape. So in this case, I have this over here. Let's say we wanted to do something like this or something like this, as we already have this cap over here. Just going to move that aside, make that image bigger, open image in a new tab. There we go. So what we can do is we can just modify our cube. For example, let's make it bigger. Let's get one specific part over here, for example, this face, and make it tinier. We can modify our cube, use adjust it in, and then we can just select our edges and start modifying them. For example, here I can move it up and then use restrain that operation along of the Z axis. I can just scale that there. And then I can just scale this up, for example. I could do inset over here, for example. This is part of an add-on, but it's a free add-on that you can always search in the preferences. But this add-on is called Loop Tool. Loop Tool will allow me to do a circle. So circle in this case will be a square because we only have enough geometry to do a square. We'll rotate that, and then I will do an extrusion. This extrusion will be my kind of cap, or the little extrusion out of the AirPods. And then I can start modifying my thing. Same thing, if I think it's too thin, I can just do scale it. And that's it. If you think it's deformed, you can always just come over here and just modify it, whatever you need. For example, like this shall be fine. I can adjust here, Control R, adjust here, and that's it. I could always do an inset over here just to make this area more flat. And then I can add more levels of subdivision for this. And then adjust the location of my cap. So used to have a basic shape of my AirPods, we have something like this. Now, let's say I want to join these two. For example, I can increment the level one more and one more. I will select my objects, shade auto smooth. We'll select one, then select the other, and I will press Ctrl J to join them. Or better said, let's apply the modifier, the subdivision modifier. And then I'm just going to Ctrl J to join them, select one, select the other. Now shade out the smooth just to make sure. Now I can add a mirror modifier to this. Mirror modifier, not along of the Y, but not along of the X, but the Y axis. Can just go in and we'll have the two sides of my earbuds in this case. So this modeling is just in terms of experience on how you will achieve the closest look to your model. In this case, this is just a little example or a little representation of what you can achieve with something simple, so quick or so far. Then later you will have other tools that will help you into 3D modeling. For example, you will have proportional editing, then you will have, for example, a snap tool over here, and you will have other aspects over here. But to not make this 1 hour lesson complicated, I think it will be more than enough, as we already have talked about the interface. We have talked about all the target modifiers that are mirror and subdivision modifier, and we talk about the geometry, and we also talk about the modeling or polygon modeling itself. Now, there is one thing I want to say before ending the lesson, is I told you earlier that there are some specific cases and scenarios where triangles can be detrimental to your model. For example, let's add a UV sphere. The UV sphere, let's isolate it, slash on the numpad, or diagonal on the numpad to isolate it. So this UV sphere is using a sphere, right? We have quads over here, but we also have triangles here on the top and also on the bottom. So if we were to add subdivisions to this, you will see that the top part and the bottom part are starting to get this weird distortion. As you can see, these lines and this point, this is made because of this point is just too dense in geometry over here, and these parts over here are also depends on how the subdivision modifier affects the triangles in this case, or the trees. That's why we have these weird deformations. So in this case, if you look it from far away, is fine, but let's say you have a metallic look in your model. As you can see, if the reflection reaches those, you will be able to see it from far away. So let's just add the smooth modifier just to make sure that we have smoothing. As you can see, we still have issues over here. For example, let's change it over here. You will see reflections will make it look weird. let's say over here we have, this is not kind of metallic, it's a little less visible, but it's still there. A person with experience will just look at it and will say, something is weird over here. Or, well, not a person with experience, it's like we as humans, our eyes are really made to look at things and understand that something is wrong with it. And so yeah, in this case, one of the ways to fix it is just to have a quad sphere. So it's a sphere made out of quads. In this case, this one is from a add-on. So yeah, the way you can do your own quad sphere is use with modifiers. So I'm going to add a cube, and you can add, for example, 3 levels of subdivision, and you think it will be fine. Yeah, I mean, it looks like a sphere, but as you can see, it's not completely a sphere. The corners over here are still looking, or you are able to still look those corners, kind of. So there is a modifier that is deformative, and it called cast. What it does, it just take those corners and modify. For example, it does this and does this. So these will allow us to control these specific corners. If you were to put one over here, you will have a perfect sphere. So yeah, in this case, you can modify these however you want. For example, you can just start your process again. For example, here, we could do a control bevel, a control B for bevel, control B bevel, control B as boy, and for example, do an extrusion for this. And for example, let's select this face. We will have a detail like that, and we have guts over here. For example, we can just start just a kind of creative process of what we can do. And then we can use, for example, bevel like this, add a cut over here, select those, insert. Insert. We could just do. This is one of the things about extrusion. So extrusion in this case, you thought it will just go in or go out, but in this case, it was just moving from side to side. And one thing I want to specify about some specific operations in Blender. Number one is there's 2 types of operations in one step, or operation in multiple steps. So extrusion is one of those operations in multiple steps. Let's go to the sphere here. Huh. Weird. Oh, it's because it's disabled in the... Oh, that's why. Well, just leave that there. When you do the sphere, you will want to apply the modifier spheres, or at least the cast one, just to get the sphere, just to get the sphere as it is. Now, I was explaining the extrusion. So the extrusion, if we were to select this and I were to use extrude, if you can say that escape or right click and will cancel the operation, but that's not the case. As you can see, if we go to use a straight to object mode, we still have the extrusion, and it's creating this issue. It is more noticeable if we change to, for example, a metallic view. If we just select other area, for example, and then I do E to extrude, right? I will cancel and then Control Z. And now if I were to go to object mode, you will see that it's not there because we got rid of the extrusion. So how this works is just create the extrusion and it pass onto the second operation that is placing your extrusion in a new location. So to be specific, when you're canceling at this point, your canceling is the second operation, not the first operation. The first operation is the extrusion. So if you cancel, you're just canceling the second step of the extrusion operation. Yes. So if I were to do Control Z and Control Z once more to get rid of this, we will be fine. And the difference, for example, a one-step operations like insert, if I were used to cancel it, it will just cancel the whole thing. And that's it. For this one, to do the inside, we will need to do a Alt E. It will bring the extrusion menu, and this extrusion menu will allow me to extrude faces along normals. So these will allow me to do that extrusion that I wanted. So for example, maybe I want that, maybe I want this, and maybe I want something like that, extrude, maybe something like that. Or I can just scale more and just keep modifying my model however I like. The finish or the result or the final result will depend on your experience with 3D modeling, and it's just a aspect of you practicing your model and how you can reach those levels of fidelity to your reference. Well, in any case, we already have close to an hour, so that will leave it over here. Thank you for the preference, and if you have any question, we can always have more lessons, so just let me know if you need anything else.